The Amish Revelation, redefining infrastructure. The road into Lancaster County doesn't prepare you for what you're about to see. Rolling fields stretch to the horizon. Horse-drawn buggies move steadily along narrow roads. There are no utility poles carrying high-voltage lines into massive treatment facilities. No pumping stations. No computerized control rooms. No miles of underground sewer infrastructure costing taxpayers millions of dollars every year. Yet, hidden behind one modest Amish farmhouse sits a waste treatment system that challenges nearly everything modern society assumes about sanitation. I first noticed it because there was almost nothing to notice. A shallow gravel trench disappeared quietly into the landscape. No machinery hummed in the background. No electrical connections fed pumps or aerators. No warning signs marked a complex industrial process. And perhaps most surprising of all, there was no smell. This simple system handled the waste generated by a family of 8. No odors, no swarms of flies, no visible contamination, no mechanical equipment. Standing there, it was difficult to reconcile what I was seeing with the reality most Americans know. In many communities, households pay hundreds of dollars every year to remain connected to municipal sewer systems that require constant maintenance, specialized operators, chemical treatments, and expensive infrastructure upgrades. For the average homeowner, a sewer bill of $600 per year isn't unusual. Yet this Amish family's annual maintenance cost was estimated at roughly $50. That difference raises an uncomfortable question. What exactly are we paying for? The answer becomes even more surprising when you trace the system back to its simplest form. Long before gravel trenches and biological filtration beds, the Amish approach begins with something that appears almost primitive: a small wooden privy and a bucket. After each use, a layer of sawdust is added. To most observers, the idea sounds unsanitary. Modern culture has conditioned us to believe waste must be immediately flushed away using gallons of treated drinking water. But the Amish method follows a completely different philosophy. Instead of treating human waste as something to be hidden and transported elsewhere, it is viewed as a biological resource entering a carefully managed decomposition process. Inside the composting system, naturally occurring microorganisms begin their work. As oxygen circulates through the material, microbial activity generates heat. Temperatures rise into what scientists call the thermophilic range, a level high enough to accelerate decomposition and suppress many harmful organisms. Over time, the contents undergo a remarkable transformation. The recognizable waste disappears, the odors vanish, the material darkens. What remains resembles rich forest soil more than anything most people would associate with a toilet. The smell, according to those who work with the process, is closer to damp woodland earth than sewage. At first glance, it feels impossible. But the real surprise isn't the simplicity, it's the performance. Because hidden inside this low-tech system is a number that demands attention: 98%. That figure represents bacterial removal rates observed in properly functioning biological treatment processes, using principles remarkably similar to those found in some of the most advanced wastewater treatment facilities in the world. In other words, a process built from wood, sawdust, microbes, and patience appears capable of achieving results that begin to approach the standards pursued by sophisticated industrial plants, costing millions of dollars to construct and operate. If that sounds unbelievable, that's because it challenges one of the most deeply rooted assumptions of modern infrastructure: that effectiveness must always be expensive. And that raises a larger question. If a simple biological system can deliver results this impressive, what else might we have overlooked in our pursuit of increasingly complex solutions? For many Amish families, the greatest threat to their way of life did not come from disease, environmental failure, or the collapse of their sanitation systems. It came from government mandates requiring them to connect to municipal infrastructure they neither wanted nor believed they needed. What began as a disagreement over waste management soon evolved into a much larger battle involving property rights, religious freedom, and the limits of state authority. Across parts of Pennsylvania, families who refused to abandon their traditional sanitation methods found themselves facing escalating financial penalties. Local governments issued citations, imposed fines, and attached liens to private property. In some cases, the cumulative penalties reached staggering levels. Reports documented situations in which families accumulated more than $200,000 in fines and legal claims simply because they refused to connect to a sewer system they believed violated their religious convictions and self-sufficient lifestyle. The consequences extended far beyond paperwork and court notices. Once liens were placed against properties, local authorities gained powerful enforcement tools. Families who had owned and maintained land for generations suddenly faced the possibility of losing everything. Sheriff sales became a looming threat, creating a situation in which homes, farms, and businesses could be seized and auctioned to satisfy debts created entirely by regulatory noncompliance. For communities built around land ownership and agricultural independence, the pressure was immense. The conflict reached an especially dramatic point with the case that became known as the padlocked school controversy. In one Amish community, local officials focused their attention on a small schoolhouse serving Amish children. The building functioned according to the community's traditional values and educational practices. However, government authorities insisted that the school install a conventional flush toilet system that complied with modern sanitation requirements. The Amish community refused. Their position was not based on cost alone. Community members argued that their existing waste management methods were effective, consistent with their beliefs, and aligned with their understanding of stewardship and simplicity. Officials disagreed. As the dispute intensified, authorities ultimately ordered the school closed. The image of a rural Amish schoolhouse being padlocked because of a disagreement over toilet technology became a powerful symbol of the broader struggle taking place across multiple states. To supporters of government enforcement, the issue centered on public health standards and uniform compliance with sanitation regulations. To the Amish and their advocates, the matter represented something fundamentally different. They viewed it as a test of whether religious minorities could continue practicing deeply held traditions when those traditions conflicted with bureaucratic expectations. As legal challenges expanded, the controversy attracted attention far beyond local zoning boards and county health departments. Eventually, the dispute reached the federal level. The United States Department of Justice became involved in several cases concerning Amish communities and other religious groups facing government pressure over land use and infrastructure requirements. Central to these interventions was the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act, commonly known as RLUIPA. This federal law was designed to prevent governments from imposing substantial burdens on religious exercise unless they could demonstrate a compelling governmental interest pursued through the least restrictive means available. In practical terms, the law created a powerful safeguard for religious communities whose practices came into conflict with local regulations. Federal officials argued that forcing Amish families to abandon functioning traditional systems and adopt technologies contrary to their beliefs raised serious questions under religious freedom protections. The Department of Justice's involvement transformed what had once appeared to be a local sanitation dispute into a nationally significant civil rights issue. The debate was no longer simply about sewage systems. It had become a question about the extent to which the government could compel citizens to conform when alternative solutions already existed. The legal battle gained additional significance through developments outside Pennsylvania. One of the most closely watched examples emerged from Fillmore County, Minnesota, where Amish families challenged government actions they believed unfairly targeted their religious practices. The dispute eventually drew attention at the highest levels of the American judicial system. Among the most notable observations came from Justice Neil Gorsuch, who discussed allegations that Amish families had faced reprisals for asserting their religious rights. Court documents and legal arguments described claims that government officials questioned the sincerity of religious beliefs and subjected families to heightened scrutiny because of their refusal to comply with certain regulatory demands. These concerns extended beyond technical disagreements over sanitation systems and entered the realm of constitutional protections. Justice Gorsuch's observations highlighted a fundamental principle that continues to shape the debate. Religious liberty protections lose much of their meaning if government officials are permitted to dismiss or second-guess the authenticity of sincerely held beliefs whenever those beliefs create administrative inconvenience. For many observers, the Fillmore County controversy illustrated the tension between regulatory authority and constitutional freedoms more clearly than any engineering report or public health study ever could. By this stage, the conflict had grown far beyond composting toilets, gravel trenches, or municipal sewer hookups. It had become a national conversation about who ultimately controls the use of private property, how far government authority can extend into daily life, and whether minority religious communities possess the right to maintain traditional systems that differ from modern norms. The Amish were no longer merely defending a sanitation method. They were defending the principle that citizens should not be forced to abandon sincerely held beliefs simply because a more conventional alternative exists. And as the legal battles continued to unfold, another question emerged. If these low-tech systems were truly ineffective, why were regulators so determined to eliminate them instead of testing their actual performance? For critics, the idea that plants could outperform sophisticated wastewater infrastructure sounds more like environmental folklore than science. The notion that reeds, grasses, roots, and naturally occurring bacteria could clean contaminated water seems too simple to be credible. Yet decades of scientific research tell a very different story. Long before sustainability became a global movement, a quiet botanical revolution was already underway, one that would challenge conventional engineering and redefine humanity's understanding of wastewater treatment. At the center of that revolution stood an unlikely pioneer. Her name was Kathy Seidel. Known affectionately by colleagues as Bulrush Kate, Seidel was not searching for a cheaper sewer system. She was investigating one of nature's most overlooked abilities, the extraordinary relationship between aquatic plants and water purification. What she discovered would eventually influence environmental engineers, researchers, and governments around the world. The breakthrough began in the 1950s. At the Max Planck Society in Germany, Seidel conducted a series of experiments that many experts initially dismissed as unconventional. Industrial pollution had severely impacted sections of the Rhine River, one of Europe's most important waterways. Factories discharged waste into the river, degrading water quality and damaging ecosystems. Traditional treatment approaches focused primarily on mechanical and chemical solutions. Seidel chose a different path. She turned to plants. Using dense stands of aquatic vegetation, particularly bulrushes and reeds, she began studying how contaminated water changed as it moved through root-filled environments. The results surprised even experienced researchers. Water passing through these natural systems showed significant improvements in quality. Pollutants were reduced, biological contaminants declined, ecosystem health improved. What appeared at first to be a simple interaction between plants and water was actually the visible expression of an extraordinarily complex biological process occurring beneath the surface. The secret was not the plants alone, it was the hidden world surrounding their roots. For years, many observers assumed aquatic plants directly cleaned wastewater by absorbing contaminants. While plants do contribute to the process, Seidel's work revealed that the real treatment engine existed within what scientists now call the root zone. Beneath every healthy wetland lies an immense biological community invisible to the naked eye. Plant roots create a vast underground network that provides surface area for billions upon billions of microorganisms. These microorganisms form what is known as a biofilm, a thin but highly active living layer composed of beneficial bacteria, fungi, and other microscopic organisms. This biofilm transforms plant roots into biological treatment reactors, operating continuously without pumps, motors, or chemical additives. As wastewater enters the root zone, the biofilm begins processing contaminants. Organic waste becomes food for bacteria. Harmful pathogens encounter hostile microbial competition. Nitrogen compounds are transformed through biological reactions. Phosphorus is captured and stored. Excess nutrients that would otherwise damage rivers and lakes are removed from the water cycle. At the same time, plant roots transport oxygen into portions of the surrounding environment, creating ideal conditions for specialized bacterial communities to thrive. These communities work together in a highly coordinated ecosystem that scientists are still studying decades after Seidel's original discoveries. The process is remarkably efficient. Instead of forcing wastewater through expensive mechanical systems, nature distributes treatment responsibilities among countless living organisms. Each bacterium performs a small task. Collectively, they create a self-regulating purification system capable of operating for years with minimal intervention. What makes this discovery even more remarkable is that humanity did not invent it. Nature perfected it thousands of years ago. In fact, some of history's most successful civilizations unknowingly applied the same principles long before modern science understood the biology involved. Consider the Aztec chinampas. Often described as floating gardens, chinampas were among the most productive agricultural systems ever created. Constructed within shallow lakes, these artificial islands were surrounded by canals that continuously supplied water and nutrients. Crops flourished year after year without exhausting the soil. Waste materials entered the system, nutrients were recycled, and wetland vegetation helped maintain ecological balance. Modern researchers now recognize that these ancient agricultural landscapes functioned much like large-scale constructed wetlands. The Aztecs may not have known the term biofilm, but they successfully harnessed its effects. A similar story can be found across Asia. For centuries, rice paddies have operated as highly efficient nutrient cycling ecosystems. Water moves slowly through flooded fields, where plant roots, microorganisms, and natural biological processes continuously interact. Nutrients are captured and reused, organic matter decomposes, water quality improves as it travels through the landscape. What appears to be simple agriculture is, in many ways, a sophisticated ecological engineering system refined through generations of observation and experience. These historical examples reveal an important truth. The principles behind constructed wetlands are not experimental. They are ancient. Modern science simply provided the biological explanation for systems that had already demonstrated their effectiveness across centuries. As researchers continued studying root zone treatment, countries around the world began incorporating these principles into contemporary wastewater infrastructure. What started as an unconventional botanical experiment gradually evolved into an internationally recognized engineering practice. Today, constructed wetlands operate on nearly every continent. They treat wastewater from homes, schools, businesses, farms, and entire communities. Some systems serve small rural settlements. Others process millions of gallons of water annually. Among the most compelling examples of long-term success is the German settlement of Aller-Mohe. Since 1982, the community has relied on constructed wetland principles to manage wastewater through natural biological treatment processes. Decade after decade, the system has continued operating successfully while maintaining environmental protection standards. Unlike conventional infrastructure that often requires extensive mechanical replacement and costly upgrades, the wetland system relies primarily on living biological communities, performing the same functions they have carried out since the day the project began. Perhaps most impressive of all is the system's record. Over more than 4 decades of operation, the settlement has maintained an extraordinary environmental performance history with no significant contamination events associated with system failure. The success demonstrates that natural treatment systems are not temporary experiments or idealistic environmental projects. When properly designed and maintained, they can provide reliable long-term wastewater management on a scale measured not in years, but in generations. This reality forces a reconsideration of many assumptions about modern infrastructure. For decades, technological progress has often been defined by increasing complexity, larger facilities, more equipment, more energy consumption, more automation. Yet, the evidence emerging from constructed wetlands suggests that nature sometimes achieves the same objectives through systems that are simpler, more resilient, and remarkably efficient. Kathy Seidel's research helped uncover that truth. What began as an investigation into aquatic plants evolved into a scientific validation of principles that ecosystems had quietly perfected for millennia. Her work demonstrated that wastewater treatment does not always require massive industrial infrastructure. Sometimes the most advanced technology is not technology at all. Sometimes it is a wetland. And as more communities around the world embraced these nature-based systems, an even more provocative question began to emerge. If biological treatment can match or exceed the performance of many conventional approaches, why do so many regulations continue to favor expensive centralized infrastructure over solutions designed by nature itself? By this point, the evidence appears difficult to ignore. Amish composting systems function without electricity. Constructed wetlands successfully treat wastewater across multiple continents. Scientific research has validated root zone treatment for decades. Historical civilizations operated nutrient recycling sanitation systems long before modern sewer networks existed. Yet despite all of this, these alternatives remain largely absent from mainstream residential construction. The question is obvious. If these systems work, why are they so rarely permitted? The answer may not lie in engineering. It may lie in economics. To understand the resistance faced by biological sanitation systems, it is necessary to examine a little-known document that shapes how millions of homes are built across North America, the International Residential Code, commonly known as the IRC. Most homeowners have never read it. Many have never heard of it. Yet its requirements influence nearly every aspect of residential construction, from foundations and framing to plumbing and waste disposal. Buried within this vast regulatory framework is a seemingly ordinary requirement that carries enormous consequences. In simple terms, residential buildings are generally expected to include a water closet, commonly known as a flush toilet, connected to either a sewer system or an approved septic system. At first glance, the rule appears reasonable, but critics argue that this single requirement effectively excludes an entire category of biological sanitation technologies before they can even compete. Composting systems, dry sanitation methods, and other low-cost biological alternatives often find themselves trapped in a regulatory gray area. Regardless of performance, they struggle to gain approval because they do not fit neatly within a framework written around conventional infrastructure. Supporters of these alternative systems often point to what they call the one-sentence barrier. Their argument is straightforward. A technology can be scientifically effective. It can be environmentally superior. It can cost dramatically less. Yet, if it falls outside the approved regulatory language, it may be prohibited regardless of performance. This creates a situation where innovation is not necessarily competing against engineering standards. Instead, it is competing against institutional definitions. The implications become even more significant when examining who helps write many of these standards. Building codes do not emerge from nowhere. They are developed through committees, industry consultations, technical reviews, and stakeholder participation. Critics have long questioned whether these processes create potential conflicts of interest. They note that representatives from industries directly connected to conventional wastewater infrastructure, including plumbing, pipe manufacturing, septic systems, and related construction sectors, often participate in code development discussions. To be clear, industry expertise is essential when developing technical standards. The concern raised by critics is not that experts are involved. The concern is whether established industries have incentives to favor systems that preserve existing business models while creating obstacles for disruptive alternatives. History offers many examples of this phenomenon. Technological disruptions rarely encounter resistance because they do not work. More often, they encounter resistance because they work too well. A product that requires constant maintenance creates recurring revenue. A product that lasts indefinitely creates a very different economic reality. This brings us to one of the most uncomfortable questions in the wastewater debate. What happens if a sanitation system requires almost no maintenance? The modern sewer economy is enormous. Across North America, billions of dollars are spent annually on inspections, cleaning, repairs, pipe replacement, pumping services, treatment operations, chemical additives, equipment maintenance, and infrastructure upgrades. Entire industries exist to support these systems. Thousands of companies generate revenue from activities required to keep conventional wastewater networks functioning. One market segment alone, the sewer cleaning industry, is valued in the billions of dollars. Every clogged pipe, damaged connection, blocked line, root intrusion, and infrastructure failure creates demand for services. From a business perspective, recurring maintenance is not a flaw. It is the foundation of the revenue model. Now imagine a different scenario. Imagine a biological treatment system capable of operating for decades with minimal intervention. Imagine no pumps, no motors, no complex machinery, no extensive pipe networks, no scheduled pumping contracts, no recurring repair cycles, no expensive infrastructure replacement programs. Imagine a system still functioning half a century after installation, with little more than occasional inspection and basic stewardship. For homeowners, such a system could represent extraordinary savings. For industries built around maintenance, however, it could represent something very different, an extinction event. When a technology dramatically reduces the need for ongoing services, the economic consequences extend far beyond the technology itself. Entire sectors must adapt. Revenue streams shrink, existing investments lose value, established business models face disruption. Whether intentionally or unintentionally, critics argue that regulatory systems often favor the status quo because the status quo supports powerful economic interests, and nowhere is this tension more visible than in the debate over environmental protection. For decades, homeowners using unconventional sanitation systems have faced strict scrutiny. Permit applications are denied, inspections become contentious, enforcement actions are pursued aggressively. Families may face fines, legal battles, or mandatory connection orders if their systems fall outside accepted regulatory categories. At the same time, a very different reality exists within portions of the conventional wastewater system. Across many cities, aging infrastructure struggles to manage heavy rainfall events. During storms, some municipal systems experience what engineers call combined sewer overflows, or CSOs. These systems combine stormwater and sewage within the same network. When rainfall exceeds capacity, overflow points may discharge untreated or partially treated wastewater directly into nearby rivers, lakes, or waterways to prevent backups into homes and streets. The result can involve millions of gallons of contaminated water entering natural ecosystems during major storm events. Critics see a contradiction. A rural family operating a carefully managed composting system may face regulatory penalties because their approach does not match approved standards. Meanwhile, large municipal systems responsible for documented overflow events often continue operating within established regulatory frameworks. Supporters of conventional infrastructure argue that these situations are fundamentally different and that municipalities operate under complex environmental permits designed to manage unavoidable engineering challenges. Critics counter with a simple question. If the purpose of regulation is environmental protection, should systems be judged by their actual outcomes or by whether they conform to existing categories? The contrast highlights a broader institutional dilemma. Regulations are designed to protect public health and environmental quality. But over time, regulations can also become mechanisms that protect existing systems from competition. The challenge is determining where legitimate safety concerns end and regulatory inertia begins. Because if biological treatment systems can demonstrate decades of successful performance, if wetlands can reliably purify wastewater, if scientific evidence supports their effectiveness, and if homeowners can save enormous amounts of money by using them, then the debate is no longer merely technical. It becomes economic. Who benefits from maintaining the current system? Who loses when alternatives emerge? And perhaps most importantly, how many innovations never reach the public because they threaten industries that depend on the old way of doing things? Those questions lead directly to the final and perhaps most surprising discovery of all. Because beyond the legal battles, beyond the scientific evidence, and beyond the economic incentives, lies a real-world test already taking place, one that may reveal whether nature's approach to sanitation is merely an alternative or the future itself. After decades of legal battles, scientific validation, and economic debate, the question is no longer whether biological treatment systems can work. The evidence presented throughout this investigation suggests they already do. The more important question is whether ordinary homeowners can realistically apply these principles themselves. For many people, the answer may be surprisingly simple. The technologies involved are not futuristic. They do not require artificial intelligence, advanced robotics, or multi-million-dollar infrastructure projects. Instead, they rely on three resources that have existed since long before the first sewer pipe was ever manufactured: roots, microbes, and carbon. These natural components form the foundation of some of the most resilient treatment systems on Earth. And with careful planning, many of the same principles can be adapted on a household scale to reduce water consumption, lower utility costs, and increase self-sufficiency. One of the most accessible examples is the small-scale greywater wetland. Unlike blackwater systems that process toilet waste, greywater systems handle water from sinks, showers, laundry machines, and bathroom drains. This water typically contains soap residues, organic matter, and nutrients, but can often be treated through simple biological processes before being reused for landscape irrigation. At its most basic level, a household wetland can be constructed using little more than a salvaged container, gravel, wetland plants, and gravity. Some homeowners have experimented with what is commonly described as a bathtub wetland. The concept is remarkably straightforward. An old cast iron bathtub, livestock trough, recycled tank, or similar waterproof vessel becomes the treatment chamber. The container is filled with washed pea gravel, creating a porous environment through which water can slowly travel. Wetland plants such as cattails, reeds, rushes, or other suitable species are planted throughout the gravel bed. As greywater enters the system, it moves through the root zone. The gravel provides structural support, the roots create biological habitat. The microorganisms attached to those roots begin processing nutrients and organic materials. What appears to be a decorative garden feature is actually a living treatment ecosystem operating continuously beneath the surface. The beauty of the design lies in its simplicity. No electrical pumps are required if gravity can move the water. No chemical additives are necessary. No complex machinery must be maintained. The plants grow, the microbes work. The water gradually becomes cleaner as it moves through the system. Yet, successful implementation depends on more than simply filling a container with gravel and plants. Proper design remains essential. Among the most important considerations is subsurface flow. One of the key principles behind modern constructed wetlands is ensuring that water remains below the surface as it travels through the treatment area. This approach minimizes odors, discourages insect breeding, reduces human contact with untreated water, and helps satisfy many regulatory concerns associated with greywater reuse. Achieving subsurface flow often begins with grade. Many designers recommend maintaining a gentle slope that encourages steady movement through the wetland without causing erosion or excessive velocity. A grade of approximately 2% is frequently cited as an effective target. In practical terms, this means the outlet sits slightly lower than the inlet, allowing gravity to move water gradually through the system. The difference may appear insignificant, but over time, proper grading determines whether water flows efficiently or stagnates. Mulch layers provide another important component. Placed above portions of the wetland or irrigation area, mulch helps suppress evaporation, protects soil structure, and improves moisture distribution. It also contributes additional carbon-rich material to the ecosystem, supporting microbial activity and nutrient cycling. Perhaps most importantly, mulch helps conceal water beneath the surface, creating a cleaner and more aesthetically pleasing landscape, while reducing exposure concerns. The result is a system that functions quietly in the background. Visitors may see only plants and landscaping. Beneath the surface, however, an entire biological treatment process is underway. For homeowners focused on long-term financial security, the economic implications can be substantial. Consider a typical household connected to municipal wastewater infrastructure. Monthly sewer charges accumulate year after year. Rate increases occur periodically. Infrastructure upgrades are passed on through taxes, assessments, and utility bills. For homeowners relying on septic systems, another set of expenses emerges. Inspections, pumping services, repairs, drain field rehabilitation, and eventual replacement all contribute to the lifetime cost of ownership. Individually, these expenses may seem manageable. Collectively, they become significant. Over the course of a 30-year mortgage, utility charges alone can consume tens of thousands of dollars. Add septic maintenance and replacement costs, and the total financial burden grows even larger. When homeowners calculate the long-term impact, the numbers become difficult to ignore. A household spending only modest amounts on sewer fees each month may ultimately pay tens of thousands of dollars over 3 decades. Septic system replacement can add thousands more. Depending on location, rate increases, and maintenance requirements, the combined cost can approach or exceed $50,000 during the life of a mortgage. By contrast, biological systems often concentrate costs at the beginning rather than distributing them indefinitely into the future. Construction requires planning. Installation requires labor. But once established, many natural treatment systems operate with minimal ongoing expense. The difference resembles the distinction between owning an asset and renting a service. One creates long-term independence. The other creates perpetual dependency. This is where the discussion moves beyond engineering and economics into something more fundamental: autonomy. Throughout history, communities have sought ways to secure the necessities of life without relying entirely on distant institutions. Food production, water collection, energy generation, and waste management have all been part of that effort. Modern infrastructure undoubtedly provides enormous benefits, but resilience often comes from diversification rather than dependence on a single system. Biological treatment offers one form of that resilience. It works during power outages. It functions without complex machinery. It relies on natural processes refined through millions of years of evolution. And unlike many industrial technologies, it becomes more integrated with the surrounding ecosystem over time, rather than less. This brings us to the final conclusion of the investigation. The Amish did not discover a secret technology. Kathy Seidel did not invent a revolutionary machine. The Aztecs did not possess advanced industrial infrastructure. Yet all of them relied on the same underlying principle. Nature already knows how to process waste. The roots of wetland plants provide habitat, microbes perform the chemistry, carbon supplies the biological fuel. Together, these elements create treatment systems capable of functioning with remarkable efficiency and durability. In an age obsessed with complexity, that conclusion may seem almost too simple. But sometimes the most powerful solutions are not the newest, they are the oldest. And after examining the science, the economics, the history, and the real-world performance of these systems, one truth becomes increasingly difficult to dismiss. When it comes to sustainable waste management, the most effective tools may not be concrete, steel, pumps, or chemicals. They may simply be roots, microbes, and carbon. The future of sanitation may not depend on building larger systems. It may depend on remembering how nature has quietly solved the problem all along.